The woman sitting across from Zachary Hawthorne at the charity gala looked exactly like the therapist who had saved his life 3 years ago. But when he called her Dr. Brennan, she smiled politely and said her name was Harper Nelson, and she taught second grade at Roosevelt Elementary. He stared at her, stunned, because the resemblance was uncanny. Same warm brown eyes, same gentle smile, same way of tilting her head when she listened. But this woman had longer hair, wore a simple navy dress instead of professional suits, and carried herself with a quiet modesty that felt different from the composed confidence of his former therapist. "I'm sorry," Zachary said, setting down his champagne glass. "You just remind me of someone who changed my life." "That's kind of you to say," Harper replied, her voice soft. "Though I'm sure I'm much less impressive than whoever you're thinking of. I'm only here because my sister's on the planning committee and needed extra bodies at the tables." Zachary studied her face, still not entirely convinced they weren't the same person, but he let it go. "Well, I'm glad you're here. These events can be brutally boring when you're sitting with strangers." "Are you here alone?" Harper asked, genuinely curious rather than flirtatious. "I am. My assistant usually guilts me into attending these fundraisers, something about community responsibility and public image." He smiled, and it was genuine, which surprised him. 3 years ago, before therapy, before the hard work of changing who he was, he never smiled at charity events. He barely smiled at all. Harper laughed, a light sound that made something in his chest tighten. "That sounds familiar. My sister says the same thing, that we should give back, be involved. I prefer spending my Saturday nights grading papers and watching old movies, honestly." "What's your favorite?" Zachary found himself leaning forward, interested in a way he hadn't been interested in anyone for a long time. "Roman Holiday," Harper said without hesitation. "I'm a sucker for Audrey Hepburn." They talked through dinner, through dessert, through the speeches and the silent auction. Zachary learned that Harper had been teaching for 5 years, that she loved her students fiercely, that she volunteered at a literacy program on weekends, and that she'd moved to the city from a small town in Vermont. Harper learned that Zachary ran a pharmaceutical company, that he'd recently restructured his business to focus on affordable medication, and that he collected vintage watches. What she didn't learn was that 4 years ago, Zachary Hawthorne had been a different man. Ruthless, cold, willing to crush competitors and cut corners to maximize profits. He'd inherited Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals from his father at 28 and spent the next 3 years turning it into a billion-dollar empire through aggressive tactics that hurt people. Patients couldn't afford medications. Smaller companies went bankrupt. Employees burned out under impossible demands. Then his younger sister Emma overdosed on pills she'd bought from a black market dealer because she couldn't afford her legitimate prescription from another company. The irony wasn't lost on him. His own industry's price gouging had contributed to a market that killed his sister. He'd spiraled after that. Couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, couldn't face himself in the mirror. His assistant practically dragged him to Dr. Claire Brennan, a therapist who specialized in grief and moral injury. For 18 months, Dr. Brennan helped him dismantle everything he'd built his identity on and reconstruct himself into someone who could live with his reflection. The work was excruciating. He'd had to confront every ruthless decision, every person he'd harmed, every shortcut he'd taken. He'd restructured his entire company, slashing executive salaries including his own, creating affordable medication programs, funding research into rare diseases that weren't profitable. His board threatened to remove him. His father's old colleagues called him a bleeding heart fool. His profit margins dropped 40% that first year, but he could sleep again. He could think about Emma without wanting to die. He could look at himself and see someone trying to be better. And now, sitting across from a second-grade teacher who looked heartbreakingly similar to the woman who'd guided him through that transformation, Zachary felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe, or the possibility of something beyond atonement. "Can I see you again?" he asked when the gala ended and they stood in the hotel lobby. "Maybe for coffee." Harper hesitated, and he saw the uncertainty flicker across her face. "I don't really date much," she said carefully. "I'm sort of boring, honestly. Early mornings, lesson planning, parent-teacher conferences." "I like boring," Zachary said, and meant it. "I spent too many years chasing exciting, and it nearly destroyed me. Please, just coffee." She studied him for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw. Did she see the expensive suit, the watch that cost more than most people made in a year, the carefully groomed appearance of wealth and power? Or did she see something else, something he hoped was there now? "Okay," Harper said finally. "Coffee. But somewhere normal, not some fancy place. There's a diner near my apartment that makes excellent pancakes." Zachary grinned. "Pancakes and coffee. You've got yourself a date." He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he lay in his penthouse apartment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Harper's laugh and the way she'd talked about her students with such genuine affection. He thought about calling Dr. Brennan to tell her about the woman who looked like her twin. But he hadn't spoken to his therapist in over a year, since they'd mutually agreed he'd done the work and was ready to continue alone. The coffee date turned into a 2-hour breakfast where they talked until the lunch rush started, and the waitress gently suggested they might want to clear the table. Harper told him about the little boy in her class who struggled with reading but had the most vivid imagination she'd ever encountered. Zachary told her about the new drug trial his company was funding for pediatric cancer treatments, leaving out the part about how it would likely lose them millions of dollars. "Why pharmaceuticals?" Harper asked, sipping her third refill of coffee. "That's such a specific field." Zachary's jaw tightened. He'd known this question would come eventually. "My father's company," he said simply. "I inherited it when he retired, but I've been trying to reshape it into something different, something better than what it was." "That must be hard," Harper said, her eyes full of understanding. "Living up to family expectations while also trying to be your own person." "You have no idea," Zachary murmured. They started seeing each other regularly after that. Coffee dates turned into dinners. Dinners turned into walks through the park. Walks turned into Harper inviting him to her classroom after school to help her set up a science experiment station. Zachary found himself Googling things like, "What do second graders like?" and showing up with educational posters about the solar system. "You know you don't have to impress me with expensive gifts," Harper said one afternoon, though she was smiling as she hung the posters. "Though the kids do love these." "I want to," Zachary said. "I like seeing you happy." What surprised him most was how easy it was to be around Harper. She didn't care about his money or his status. When he picked her up in his Tesla, she commented on the environmental benefits of electric vehicles and then talked about her class's recycling project. When he took her to a nice restaurant, she was gracious and delighted, but she seemed just as happy splitting pizza on her apartment floor while they watched Roman Holiday on her laptop. 6 weeks into dating, Harper invited him to her literacy program. It was held in a community center in a neighborhood Zachary recognized with a sharp pang of guilt. 4 years ago, his company had shut down a clinic in this area, claiming it wasn't profitable enough. The building still stood empty 3 blocks away, a monument to his old priorities. He watched Harper work with a teenage girl who was struggling to read at a 4th grade level, her patience infinite. her encouragement genuine. She never talked down to the girl, never showed frustration, just kept gently guiding her through the words until something clicked and the girl's face lit up with understanding. "You're really good at this," Zachary said afterward as they walked to his car. "Everyone deserves to read," Harper said simply. "It opens up the whole world. I can't stand the thought of anyone missing out on that because they didn't have the right support." Zachary swallowed hard. "Can I tell you something?" They sat in his car in the parking lot, and he told her everything. About his father's company, about the ruthless way he'd run it, about Emma and her death, and the 18 months of therapy that followed. About restructuring the company and the backlash, and the constant struggle to balance doing good with staying solvent. About the clinic 3 blocks away that he'd shut down, and how he saw it every time he drove through this neighborhood. Harper listened without interrupting, her hand finding his somewhere in the middle of the story. When he finished, his voice rough with emotion, she was quiet for a long moment. "That must have been incredibly hard," she said finally. "Facing all of that, choosing to change." "I had help," Zachary admitted. "My therapist. She looked a lot like you, actually. That's why I thought you were her when we first met." "She must have been special," Harper said. "She saved my life," Zachary said. "But I did the work, I made the changes. I'm still making them every day." Harper turned to face him fully, her brown eyes serious. "Can I ask you something? Why did you ask me out? That first night at the gala, was it because I reminded you of her?" Zachary considered the question carefully. "Maybe at first," he said honestly. "But by the end of the night, it was because you were you. Because you talked about your students like they hung the moon. Because you laughed at my terrible jokes. Because you seemed real in a way I haven't encountered in a long time." Harper leaned over the center console and kissed him, soft and sweet, and Zachary felt something in his chest crack open. Not breaking, but expanding, making room for something he hadn't thought he deserved. "I really like you," Harper whispered against his lips. "I was trying not to because you're so far out of my league it's ridiculous, but I really, really like you." "You're out of my league," Zachary said, pulling her closer despite the awkward angle. "You're genuinely good, Harper. I'm just someone trying to atone." "Maybe we're both just people trying to do our best," Harper said. They dated through the fall and into winter. Zachary attended her school's holiday concert and watched her students perform an enthusiastic, if slightly chaotic rendition of Jingle Bells. Harper came to the ribbon-cutting ceremony when Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals opened a new free clinic, and he saw her tear up when he mentioned dedicating it to Emma's memory. He met her sister Miranda, who grilled him mercilessly about his intentions. He met her parents over Thanksgiving, and her father asked pointed questions about his company's drug pricing that Zachary answered honestly, even when it wasn't flattering. Harper met his mother, who'd been distant since Emma's death, but warmed up when Harper showed genuine interest in photo albums and family stories. "She's lovely," his mother said later, pulling Zachary aside. "Emma would have liked her." Zachary had to excuse himself to the bathroom to collect himself after that. The first real fight came in January, when a business magazine published a profile on Zachary titled "The Reformed Titan," how Zachary Hawthorne went from ruthless CEO to philanthropist. The article detailed his company's transformation, but also included interviews with people who'd been hurt by his old policies. Former employees who'd burned out, patients who'd struggled to afford medications, the family of a man who died because he'd been rationing his insulin. Harper read the article on her phone while they were supposed to be having dinner at her apartment. Zachary watched her face change as she scrolled, saw the moment she reached the worst parts. "Is this all true?" she asked, her voice tight. "Yes," Zachary said. He wouldn't lie to her. I told you I was ruthless, that I hurt people. You didn't tell me you fired a woman 3 days before Christmas because she took time off when her daughter was in the hospital, Harper said, her eyes bright with anger and tears. You didn't tell me you raised insulin prices by 300% in 1 year. I know, Zachary said quietly. There's more, Harper. Things that didn't make it into that article. I'm not proud of who I was. But you changed, Harper said, and it sounded like she was trying to convince herself. You've changed everything. I'm trying, Zachary said. Every day I'm trying, but I can't undo the past. I can only try to do better now. Harper set down her phone and covered her face with her hands. Zachary wanted to reach for her but wasn't sure he had the right. They sat in silence for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. My uncle died because he couldn't afford his heart medication, Harper said finally, her voice muffled. 5 years ago. He was rationing it and he had a heart attack. Zachary felt sick. Harper, it probably wasn't your company, she continued, lowering her hands. But it might have been. It was definitely someone like you, someone who decided profit mattered more than people. You're right, Zachary said. You're absolutely right. And I'm so sorry about your uncle. Are you really different now? Harper asked, looking at him with those warm brown eyes that suddenly seemed like they could see straight through him. Or are you just better at public relations? The question hit him like a physical blow, but he understood it. I'm different, he said. I restructured the entire company. I slashed my own salary by 60%. I created affordable medication programs and funded unprofitable research. I've spent 3 years trying to make amends, and I'll spend the rest of my life doing it. But Harper, I understand if that's not enough for you, if I'm not enough. Harper stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the street below. Zachary waited, his heart pounding, wondering if this was the end, if the past he couldn't change would take away the future he desperately wanted. I need some time, Harper said finally, to think about this, about us. I understand, Zachary said, standing. Take all the time you need. He left her apartment feeling like he'd been hollowed out. He'd known this moment would come eventually, known that someone would look at his past and decide the present couldn't make up for it. He just hadn't expected it to hurt this much. A week passed with no contact. Zachary threw himself into work, personally reviewing every drug pricing decision, every patient assistance program application. He visited the clinic dedicated to Emma and spent an afternoon talking to patients about their experiences. One woman told him the clinic had saved her life, that she'd been choosing between her diabetes medication and rent before the free clinic opened. Dr. Hawthorne, she said, using the honorary title from his doctorate in pharmaceutical sciences. Whatever you did before, you're doing good now. That matters. He wanted to believe her. On the 8th day, Harper texted him asking if they could meet at the diner where they'd had their first date. Zachary arrived 15 minutes early, ordered coffee he couldn't drink because his stomach was churning, and waited. Harper walked in looking tired, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a sweater. She slid into the booth across from him and ordered hot chocolate when the waitress came by. I talked to a lot of people this week, Harper said without preamble. I called the clinic you opened. I spoke to patients in your assistance programs. I even tracked down some of your current employees to ask them about working conditions. Okay, Zachary said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Everyone said the same thing, Harper continued. That Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals is different now. That you're different. They talked about fair wages and reasonable hours and medication programs that actually help people. One woman told me you personally called her when her son needed a rare drug and expedited the entire approval process. Marcus, Zachary said quietly. He has a degenerative neurological condition. The drug he needs costs $60,000 per dose, and insurance wouldn't cover it because it's still experimental. We got him into a compassionate use program. Why didn't you tell me about things like that?" Harper asked. "Because I'm not looking for credit," Zachary said. "I'm trying to do what's right because it's right, not because it makes me look good." Harper's hot chocolate arrived and she wrapped her hands around the mug. "I was so angry when I read that article." "Angry at you, angry at a system that lets people become that ruthless, angry at myself for not seeing it." "You did see it," Zachary said. "I told you what I'd done." "You told me the broad strokes," Harper said. "You didn't tell me the details, the human cost. Would you have dated me if I had?" Zachary asked. Harper was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I think you deserve the chance to try." "Where does that leave us?" Zachary asked, and he hated how vulnerable he sounded. Harper looked at him, really looked at him, and Zachary forced himself not to look away. Let her see everything. The regret, the determination, the desperate hope that she might choose him anyway. "I think it leaves us here," Harper said slowly. "With me understanding that people can change but also knowing that the past has real consequences. With you continuing to do the work of being better, and with both of us deciding if we want to move forward together." "Do you," Zachary asked, "want to move forward?" "Yes," Harper said, and Zachary felt like he could breathe again. "But I need you to be honest with me, Zachary, about everything. The good and the bad. Can you do that?" "Yes," Zachary promised. "I can do that." They talked for hours that night, and Zachary told her everything he'd left out before. Every awful decision, every person he'd hurt, every moment of his transformation that had felt impossible. Harper listened and asked questions and sometimes got angry, but she stayed. She listened to all of it and stayed. "I'm not going to lie and say the past doesn't matter," Harper said as they walked back to her apartment, their hands linked. "Because it does, but I also believe people can change. I see it every day with my students. Kids who struggle and grow and become different people. Why should adults be any different?" "I love you," Zachary said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "I know it's fast, and I know I don't deserve you, but I love you, Harper." Harper stopped walking and turned to face him, her eyes shining. "You love me, completely," Zachary said. "You make me want to be better, not because I'm trying to atone, but because you deserve someone good, someone worthy of you." "You already are," Harper said, reaching up to cup his face. "You're not perfect and you've made mistakes, but you're doing the work to be better. That's all any of us can do. And I love you too." They kissed on the sidewalk, under the streetlights in the January cold, and Zachary felt something he hadn't felt since before Emma died. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he could have a future that wasn't defined by his past. Spring came, and with it, new challenges. A competitor tried to poach several of Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals' top researchers by offering them significantly higher salaries. Zachary's board pressured him to match the offers, even though it would mean cutting funding to patient programs. He refused and lost 3 researchers, but kept his programs. Harper was there when he came home frustrated and exhausted, reminding him why he'd made the choice he did. "You can't save everyone," she said gently, "but you can stay true to what you believe in." In May, Harper's school held a career day and she invited Zachary to speak. He almost said no, worried that parents would recognize his name and object, but Harper insisted. "You have an important story to tell," she said. "About making mistakes and choosing to change. Kids need to hear that." He spoke to a classroom of second graders about medicine and science, keeping it simple and fun. But when one little girl asked him what he liked best about his job, he found himself telling the truth. "I like helping people feel better," he said. "That's what medicine should do. It should help people, not just make money." After the presentation, A father approached him. "You're that CEO," the man said, and Zachary braced himself. "The one who reformed his company." "Yes," Zachary said. "My daughter's in your patient assistance program," the man continued. "She has cystic fibrosis. Your medication has given us 3 more years with her so far. So thank you. Thank you for changing." Zachary had to step outside after that, overwhelmed. Harper found him on the playground, sitting on a swing, trying to compose himself. "That's why you do it," she said, sitting on the swing next to him. "Moments like that." "It doesn't make up for the people I hurt before," Zachary said. "No," Harper agreed. "But it matters. It means something. You're saving lives now, Zachary. That has to count for something." They spent the summer together, and Zachary found himself falling more in love with Harper every day. The way she sang in the shower, off-key but enthusiastic. The way she kept thank you cards from former students in a box under her bed and read them when she was having a bad day. The way she pushed him to be better, not through criticism, but through her own example of goodness. In August, Harper's lease was up, and Zachary asked her to move in with him. She hesitated, looking around his penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive furnishings. "This doesn't feel like me," she said carefully. "So we'll make it feel like you," Zachary said. "We'll make it feel like us. Whatever you want to change, we'll change." They compromised, moving into a smaller condo that felt less like a display of wealth and more like a home. Harper filled it with plants and photos and a ridiculous collection of teacher-themed coffee mugs. Zachary added his books and his vintage watches and learned to live with the constant presence of construction paper and glitter. "How do you get glitter everywhere?" he asked one night, finding sparkles on his suit jacket. "It's a teacher superpower," Harper said, grinning. "We spread glitter and knowledge wherever we go." In October, the anniversary of when they met at the gala, Zachary planned something special. He took Harper back to the hotel where they'd first talked, but this time, he'd arranged for them to have dinner on the rooftop, overlooking the city lights. "This is beautiful," Harper said, her eyes wide. "Zachary, this is too much." "Nothing is too much for you," Zachary said. He took her hand, and even though he'd rehearsed this moment 100 times, his heart was pounding. "Harper, this past year has been the best year of my life. You've made me better, not just by being with me, but by showing me what it looks like to be genuinely good, to care about people, to do the right thing just because it's right." "Zachary," Harper said, tears already forming in her eyes. "You changed everything without even trying," Zachary continued, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I reformed my company for my sister to honor her memory, but I became someone capable of love because of you. I didn't know that changing would lead to this, to us. To falling so completely in love with you that I can't imagine my life without you in it." He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring. Nothing ostentatious, nothing designed to show off wealth, just a beautiful stone on a classic band. "Will you marry me?" Zachary asked. "Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you?" "Yes," Harper said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes. But Zachary, you're already worthy. You've always been worthy." He slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her as the city lights sparkled around them, feeling like maybe she was right. Maybe he was worthy of this love, this life, this second chance. They were married the following spring in a small ceremony at the community center where Harper volunteered. Her students made decorations, and his mother cried through the entire ceremony. They wrote their own vows, and when Zachary promised to spend every day trying to be the man Harper saw in him, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "I love you for who you were brave enough to become," Harper said in her vows. "For choosing change even when it was hard. For building something good out of something broken. And I promise to stand beside you, to remind you of your goodness when you forget, and to love you exactly as you are. They honeymooned in Vermont, visiting Harper's hometown, hiking in the mountains, and staying in a small bed and breakfast that was nothing like the luxury resorts Zachary could have afforded. It was perfect. 2 years after their wedding, Harper came home from school with news. She was pregnant. They stood in their kitchen, Harper holding the positive test, both of them crying and laughing and holding each other. "We're going to have a baby," Harper kept saying, like she couldn't quite believe it. "We're going to have a baby," Zachary repeated, and then, more seriously, "I'm going to be a father." He was terrified. What if he messed this up the way he'd messed up so many other things? What if his past caught up with them? What if he couldn't be the father this child deserved? Harper, knowing him so well, put her hand on his cheek. "You're going to be an amazing father," she said firmly, "because you know how to choose to be better. You know how to love, and you'll teach our child those things too." Their daughter was born in October, 3 years to the month after Zachary had proposed. They named her Emma Claire, after his sister and his therapist, the two women who'd made it possible for him to become someone capable of being a husband and father. Holding Emma in his arms for the first time, Zachary understood something he'd been too broken to see before. The past didn't have to define the future. Change was possible. Love was possible. Redemption, if he kept doing the work, was possible. "Thank you," he whispered to Harper as she slept in the hospital bed, exhausted and beautiful. "Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving." Emma made a small sound, and Zachary looked down at her tiny, perfect face. She had Harper's eyes, or at least they looked like they'd be Harper's warm brown eventually. She had a tiny fist curled against her cheek, and when Zachary carefully touched one finger, she wrapped her entire hand around it. "Hi, Emma," he whispered. "I'm your dad. I'm going to mess up sometimes, but I promise I'll always try to do better. I promise I'll love you and your mom with everything I have. And I promise I'll teach you what your namesakes taught me, that it's never too late to change, and that love can heal almost anything." 5 years later, Zachary stood in front of a congressional committee, testifying about pharmaceutical pricing reform. It was a far cry from the ruthless CEO he'd once been, the one who would have fought tooth and nail against any regulation that cut into profits. Now he was advocating for change, using Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals as an example of how companies could be profitable while still prioritizing patients. "It's not easy," he told the committee. "We've lost investors. We've faced criticism. Our profit margins are lower than industry standard. But we're sustainable, our employees are well compensated, and most importantly, we're helping people. That's what medicine should do." Harper watched from the gallery, Emma on her lap. Their daughter was 5 now, bright and curious and full of the same compassion as her mother. When Zachary finished his testimony, Emma waved at him, and several committee members smiled. Afterward, a journalist approached him. "Mr. Hawthorne, you've become quite the advocate for reform. Some people say you're trying to assuage guilt over your past business practices. What do you say to that?" Zachary looked at Harper and Emma waiting for him by the door. "I'd say they're probably right," he admitted. "I did terrible things when I ran my company the old way. People suffered because of my decisions. I can't undo that. But I can make sure it doesn't keep happening. If guilt keeps me working toward change, then I'll use that guilt productively." "Any regrets?" the journalist pressed. "Of course," Zachary said. "I'll always regret the harm I caused, but I don't regret changing. That decision brought me everything that matters: my wife, my daughter, the chance to actually help people. I reformed my company to honor my sister's memory, but that reformation changed me in ways I never expected. It taught me how to love, how to live with purpose, how to be part of something bigger than myself. That night, after Emma was asleep and he and Harper were curled up on the couch, she turned to him. "I'm proud of you," she said. "For today, for everything. You've come so far." "We've come so far," Zachary corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "You were already changing when we met," Harper said. "I just walked beside you." "You were my reason to keep changing," Zachary said. "Every time I wanted to slip back into old patterns, every time doing the right thing felt too hard, I thought about you, about being someone you could be proud of, someone Emma could look up to." "She already looks up to you," Harper said softly. "Do you know what she told her class during show and tell last week?" "What?" "That her daddy helps people feel better, that he makes medicine for kids who are sick. She said you're a hero." Zachary felt his eyes sting. "I'm not a hero." "To her you are," Harper said. "And to a lot of other people too. You changed an entire industry. You proved that companies can do good and stay in business. That matters, Zachary." "I love you," Zachary said, pulling her closer. "I'll never stop being grateful that you saw something in me worth loving." "I love you too," Harper said. "And I saw the same thing everyone else missed, that underneath all that ruthlessness was someone desperate to be better. You just needed a reason." They sat in comfortable silence, and Zachary thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a ruthless CEO willing to sacrifice anything for profit, through the devastation of losing Emma, through 18 months of brutal therapy, through restructuring his entire company and life, to meeting Harper at a gala and falling in love without meaning to. He'd reformed himself for his sister's memory, never knowing that the change would lead to love, never knowing that becoming better would bring him everything he'd never known he needed. Harper had been right from the start. They were both just people trying to do their best. But together, their best was pretty extraordinary. 10 years after they met, Zachary and Harper stood in the newly opened wing of the Emma Hawthorne Memorial Hospital, a facility dedicated to providing free and low-cost care to underserved communities. It was funded by Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals and several partner organizations, a project that had taken years to bring to fruition. Emma, their daughter, was 10 now, joined by a brother, Henry, who was 6. Both children understood, as much as children could, that their father had once been someone different, someone who'd made mistakes. But they knew him as a man who worked hard to help people, who came home tired but satisfied, who taught them that doing the right thing wasn't always easy but was always worth it. "This is beautiful," Harper said, looking around the hospital lobby. "Your sister would be so proud." "Our sister," Zachary corrected gently, knowing that Harper had taken his family's pain and made it her own. "She'd love that we named it after her, that something good came from something so awful." The hospital director approached them, a woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez, who'd left a prestigious position at a private hospital to run this facility. "We're ready for the ribbon cutting whenever you are." They gathered outside with staff, community members, local politicians, and patients who'd been waiting years for accessible health care. Zachary gave a brief speech about Emma, about the importance of affordable medicine and care, about how businesses had a responsibility to their communities beyond profit. But the moment he'd remember forever came after the ceremony, when a mother approached him with her young son. The boy was thin, clearly sick, but his eyes were bright with hope. "Dr. Hawthorne," the mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "My son has leukemia. We've been traveling 2 hours each way for his treatments because we couldn't afford the closer hospital. This facility means we can stay near home. It means I don't have to choose between rent and his medicine. It means we have a chance." Zachary knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. "What's your name?" "Michael," the boy said shyly. "Michael, you're going to get the best care possible here," Zachary promised, "and you're going to beat this." "Are you the boss?" Michael asked. "Something like that," Zachary said. "My mom says you used to be mean but you changed," Michael said with the blunt honesty of children. "Is that true?" Zachary heard Harper's quiet laugh behind him. "Yes," he said, "that's true. I used to make bad decisions, but I learned that I could choose to be different. That's important to remember. We can always choose to be better." "Cool," Michael said. Then more seriously, "Thank you for building the hospital." After they left, Zachary stood for a moment overwhelmed. Harper slipped her hand into his. "You okay?" "Yeah," Zachary said. "I'm just thinking about how different my life could have been. If Emma hadn't died, if I hadn't gone to therapy, if I hadn't met you, I'd probably still be the ruthless CEO, still be hurting people, still be miserable even if I was richer." "But that's not what happened," Harper said. "You chose differently. Every single day you choose differently." "Because of you," Zachary said. "You're my compass, Harper. When I don't know what to do, I think about what you do, and it always points me in the right direction." Emma and Henry ran up then, breathless from exploring the hospital gardens. "Dad, there's a playground," Emma announced. "Can kids who are sick play there?" "That's exactly who it's for," Zachary said. "So they can still be kids even when they're in the hospital." "That's smart," Henry declared. "You're pretty smart, Dad." "I learned from the smartest person I know," Zachary said, smiling at Harper. "Your mom." That night, after the kids were asleep and they were getting ready for bed, Harper found Zachary standing in Emma's doorway, watching their daughter sleep. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "I was just thinking about how she saved my life," Zachary said quietly. "My sister Emma. Her death destroyed me, but it also woke me up, made me see what I'd become, and that led to everything else, to changing, to meeting you, to this life." "She'd be happy you found peace," Harper said. "I found more than peace," Zachary said, turning to face her. "I found purpose. I found love. I found a family. I became someone I can be proud of. And it started with deciding to change, but it became something real because of you. You made me believe I could be more than my mistakes." "You were always more than your mistakes," Harper said. "You just needed help seeing it." They stood in the hallway of their home, surrounded by family photos and children's artwork and all the beautiful mess of a well-lived life, and Zachary marveled at how far he'd come. From a man willing to let people die for profit to a man building hospitals to save them. From someone incapable of connection to someone surrounded by love. From broken to healing to whole. "Thank you," he said to Harper, the words inadequate but heartfelt. "For seeing me. For loving me. For making me want to be better." "Thank you for being brave enough to change," Harper replied. "For becoming someone capable of this love. For showing Emma and Henry that people can transform themselves." "I love you," Zachary said. "I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful that you walked into that gala." "I love you too," Harper said. "Now come to bed. Tomorrow's Saturday, and you promised the kids you'd make pancakes." As they settled into bed, Zachary's last thought before sleep was that he'd reformed for Emma, but he'd found Harper. He'd changed to atone, but he'd discovered love. He'd rebuilt his company and himself, never knowing that the transformation would bring him everything he'd never known to hope for. A partner who believed in him, children who looked at him with trust and admiration, and a life built on purpose instead of profit. The CEO had reformed from his bad past for his sister, not knowing the change would transform into something even more powerful than redemption. It would become love, family, and a legacy of good that would outlast him. And in the end, that was worth every difficult choice, every sacrifice, every moment of the long, hard work of becoming better.